Now it is time to introduce our main speaker for tonight, SHERRI. Yeah.
That was great. Thank you. I'm SHERRI. I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic and addict. I know, I did those drugs too. Ooh, I know. Well, let's see here who didn't do drugs. Anyway, gorgeous Patty, thank you so much for asking me to speak. Congratulations to the fabulous birthdays, the victories of Alcoholics Anonymous, the miracles that are in the room. I am one of you. Oh, those birthdays. So where to begin? Well, let me just tell you, I left the state of California in a state of desperation just recently. I hopped on a plane with my little dog and ran to my mother's house in Florida, where I didn't grow up, where she's in retirement land, which is really slow for someone who used to be on speed. And I wasn't sure if I was coming back, and if I was coming back, am I coming back to stay? And it looked like things started to reveal themselves because I knew God would reveal, like, is it happening here, or am I finding another chapter? And I have found another chapter yet again, and being asked to come to the rodeo and share my experience, strength, and hope really brings that all home to me. So I didn't grow up in Florida. I did grow up on the East Coast, though. I grew up in New Jersey. It's got a really bad rap now, and it needs rehab. The whole state now is really in trouble. But when I was growing up there, it was pretty wild. My house was fantastic. I was very fortunate to have a very fun, dysfunctional, upper middle class, entertainment family, you know. My grandfather was the one that held it all together because he was the big bucks, and the big bucks kind of fed out to the branches of the tree, you know, and my mother's father provided us a big house, and my mother started the wheels turning with my father, the bad boy, and, you know, who came from the wrong side of the tracks. So that's my blueprint. And I have an older brother, 5 years older, who always had the good grades and, you know, went to Hebrew school. And, you know, I was a little girl, and girls don't go to Hebrew school, and then, you know, and girls just get raised to be Jewish princesses and get married. So that was kind of it. So I grew up dancing, and I discovered my mother's pills, her little white Dexy pills, very quick. And I was perfecting the cartwheel on the front lawn. My mother said I looked like a windmill. And I loved that feeling, and I was escaping very early on. I was trying to change my feelings with her pills. And I did that for through my little ballerina years, those little bony anorexic years. And because if your underwear had to hang on your hip bone, I mean, come on, don't you think something's wrong with that? But I quickly had heart palpitations, started hearing things, went to a psychiatric ward. By the time I was 16, my father was no longer coming through the Lincoln Tunnel for dinner. He had stayed in New York and got his own apartment. My brother went to college, and I was basically one-on-one with the maniac mother. And one day she went for an eye check, an eye exam, and I guess her eyes were rolling in her head. And the doctor said, Mrs. Critchman, do you take diet pills? And she said, well, yes, I do. And he said, for how long? She says, 15, 16 years. And he said, do you know that you're addicted to them? And she went, I am not. And he said, well, then I suggest you stop taking them. So she put them down, and she went to sleep for the next 2 years. And I was just getting started. So I already had a psychiatrist at this point. I brought myself to therapy because my family just thought, what a waste of money. So I took myself to therapist because I had already started running away from home. I had my first bad boyfriend. We smoked dope. I had sex. It was a bad experience because he wanted me to have sex with his best friend who was sitting outside. He was my boyfriend. The whole thing was off the hook. It was not the dream the little Jewish princess had in her head. So then I ran away to my uncle, who was young and groovy. He was really groovy, did underground films in the West Village, and I ran away from home. And then he went to molest me, so everything was wrong. Then he would come to Passover dinner, and I think, this is not the same guy, this is the perpetrator in my life. So my life crashed at 16, and it's no surprise that it didn't make me an addict, but it certainly enabled my disease to escalate because I did find my solution in alcohol and drugs and boys at that time. And none of it was healthy. The way I approached life, the way I did things, the way I thought, this is my disease living up here. So I very quickly, when I started experimenting with my bad boyfriend, my little troublesome boyfriend, my first IV drugs, I immediately got sick. And I mean, I got sick. Something was wrong. I kept burping eggs. I felt terrible. It hurt. I was fatigued. I went to the doctor, and they found I had hepatitis non-A, non-B at 17 years old. And that scared me. Like, what do you mean? They said, your liver, you need bed rest. That's all you could do, go to bed. So, and no alcohol or drugs. So for a whole year, no alcohol or drugs, which of course proves, well, I don't have a problem then. I mean, obviously, I never even thought I had a problem, even though I made my first stay at a psychiatric ward because I was hearing sounds taking my mother's speed. And I had left school. I was provided a tutor, homeschooled for 11th and 12th grade. So in that year of not doing alcohol or drugs, I auditioned to go to performing arts in New York because everybody else was going off to college, and I knew I wasn't college bound because all I had was my dancing and my singing. And so I went and I auditioned, and I got in, and I moved right into New York. Thank you, God. And what a place for an 18-year-old. It was really fantastic. And I lived in a hotel, because that's what you do when you went to school there. And then I got an apartment, and almost a year to the day, not conscious, I went to a bar in the East Village. There was the coolest rockers there wearing men's drag, but they were straight, so you know who they were. And I thought, these guys, I want to be like them. They are the coolest guys I ever saw. And I sat at the bar, and I had 3 black Russians, and my liver went, pfft. And I had to go to the hospital this time. And so, again, no drinking or drugs. I took a lot of steps like that in my using. I went uptown. I thought maybe it's downtown. I went uptown. I had a fancy friend uptown. She brought me to a very high-end place, a club. I sat at the fabulous bar. There were all these gorgeous women of the night. I didn't know they were women of the night. I just thought they were the most gorgeous women I ever saw. Of course, they were making a lot of money. And I met the guy who first introduced me to something new. Really handsome guy. Now, this is the late 70s. He looked like Al Pacino did in The Godfather. Really hot guy. And he said, do you get high? And, of course, I always said, yes. And he gave me this little vial with this teeny, itsy-bitsy spoon. And I thought, what is that? And I went to the ladies' room, and I was like, and because it was so little. And then I came back to the table like this, and I was like my mother. And fast forward, in a couple of weeks, we got busted. And that's how it worked. That's how it didn't work. I turned 21 in court, humiliated, and it was a federal investigation because he was a smuggler, and I drove his car because it was a Jaguar, and he said, just don't go over 55, because I had it tuned, and I thought, I'd love to drive your car. So, but once again, God was definitely saving me. So I got scared straight, which doesn't last very long because you don't know what's going on. And I thought, I'm 21, and once again, back in Jersey, living with my parents who hate me because I keep screwing up and costing money. What are you going to do with your life? I thought, oh my God, all right, so if I want to be in this thing called show business, whatever that looks like, what will I do? So I started singing because I knew that's what I do best. I sing, and I started doing cabarets, which was kind of hot in the 70s. And then I met this cute little guy. Oh my God, he was so hot. I thought, he's so cute, he must be gay. And I just asked him, do you like boys or girls? And he said, it depends on the person. If I like the person, it could be a boy or a girl. And I thought, excellent, I am so in. So he was really hot. He had blue hair, and he wore tight pants with a bulge. They used to do that in those days. Now they're wearing baggy pants. I don't get it. But, it was hot. And I love that. The late 70s, early 80s, it was free-flowing. And so we became an item, and we made a band. And he took me to all these places that I wasn't walking into Max's without him, and I wasn't going to all these CBs and all these great places. So our very first gig, he wrote all summer long songs. Our very first gig, we got discovered there was a rock star in the audience. He asked us to open up for him on tour, and our life changed like that. And so did all this powder come back, which I long forgot about. And because the 80s were also, that powder was not addictive. Cocaine was just fine. So it's free and fine, and it's everywhere. And so we got signed, sealed, and delivered to a record mogul out here in California. And we became bi-coastal. And that was a great time. That was the most fun I can look back on before the alcohol and drugs destroyed everything. And very quickly, my career went up, and it crashed down. And without any tools or knowing what to do, I did what I knew how to do best. I medicated. And I became homeless. And I stood on the dope lines with an album, 1981. And people say, hey, man, didn't I just see you like at the Ritz? And I'd be like, oh, please, I need whatever I can get. And that is a very sobering truth to this day. It doesn't matter where you came from, because we all did whatever we had to do, and I surely did. And so as the homeless addict and on my bottom, and I share that because I need to remember it, and I share that an old-timer told me to remember where you came from, your last using, because that is where you'll return if you're lucky, should you ever pick up again, which we always have freedom of choice once we get clean and sober. So my bottom was homeless on the streets, and I was willing to do whatever it took to get the drugs that stopped working. And I crawled into my last shooting gallery, and that was the end. I started making my way to my father's apartment on a Sunday. I was missing in action to my family. They didn't know where their little girl went. 1 minute she was, with a pop band on TV making everybody proud, and the next minute it seemed she was missing in New York. So when I showed up at my father's apartment weighing 97 pounds or something like this, I remember when they weighed me into the hospital because I thought it was fantastic that I was so skinny. Such a great goal. And I hadn't showered, of course, or eaten, and it was a Sunday afternoon, and I knew how I looked or how I must have smelled by the way my father's face was, God rest his soul, when he opened the door and saw his daughter. Filthy, sick, probably not someone he recognized from the way I was. And I could smell the coffee and the eggs and the bacon, that Sunday smell. And he said, you want something to eat? And I was like, yeah. And I didn't want to sit on the couch because I was dirty and I didn't want to mess his house. And I ate like a starving person, shoveling it in. And then I started to crash. And he wrapped me up in a blanket, and he brought me through the tunnel to that psychiatric ward I was in when I was just 16 years old with emotional problems, and now I showed up these years later, a full-blown addict. And when I got there, now, I was walking around with a Betsy Johnson shopping bag like I had a gig any minute. I was a crazy street lady. Oh, you know who I am? No, do you? And so when I got there and they gave me some methadone, I was screaming like, this isn't working, I need something faster. And then I said, I want my room back. And they said, oh, don't worry, we have a room for you. And they did, but it was not, I had to share this room. It wasn't, I want my private room, hello. And of course, I didn't have that. And I was in a psychiatric ward, which I remember with good feelings about a psychiatric ward because they give you drugs and the little bell rings and you shuffle and they give you some Thorazine and some Valium. Well, those days were over. When the bell rang and people lined up, I said, okay. And they said, oh, you are a drug addict. We don't give you drugs. Excuse me? I'm a drug addict? I need drugs? I said, well, I said, but I can't sleep. And she said, well, nobody ever died from lack of sleep. You will. And that was how I felt, like I'm going to kill this woman, and that's where it went, 21-day detox. Then one of us started coming around, doing the rounds, the worst kind of us, the recovering counselor, so straight, and started saying, like, where would you like to go from here? I said, I don't know, where do you go? And he said, how about a halfway house? I said, halfway to where? And he said, it's a place that you live with other recovering people and you get a job. A concept I know nothing about. I wear spandex. I pop out of cakes. I'm not employable. Other than that, which was lucrative in its day. Well, then he said, well, how about, you need a rehab. And, in the 80s, that was a new word. And so I went to this 6-week program, and I had health insurance. And after 6 weeks, there were all these little housewives in New Jersey. And, of course, there were these meetings, but they weren't so thrilled about this person, an addict, in these meetings. Couldn't share freely. Couldn't even say the word drugs. So we kind of sat there, and then they said, you're sicker than most, and I was kind of proud of that. And they suggested long-term treatment. And God was working on me. Even when they brought me down to the main floor of the hospital, and I saw the serenity prayer on the wall, and I saw the word God, and I started to weep. Like really sob, because that pilot light was still on. That pilot light we all have if we're blessed enough to crawl into these rooms. And so God was doing for me what I could not do for myself. And I went to this 6-week program with my bad attitude, full of rage. I'm sicker than most, and them agreeing. And my insurance ran out, and I had the gift of desperation. And they said, well, we have a place for someone who's indigent like you. It's called Straight and Narrow, on the corner of Straight and Narrow in Paterson, New Jersey. A therapeutic community with 300 people. Only 20 of them, 15 to 20, were women. The rest, and everybody was incarcerated. There were maybe 2 people who weren't there stipulated. So there I was, and I was doing my best to get it, and I stayed there dry, working for the priest for the next bunch of years. It felt like years, for the next bunch of months. And then I left with my drug of choice, the youngest, most dangerous boy. And after we did what we wanted to do, he got drunk, got arrested, went back to where he's comfortable, and I became an H&I kind of gal. And it was a very messy entrance into my recovery. I made my way back to New York. I started working for my friend Betsy, instead of having her do costumes for me. And I found my first meeting outside. And when I walked in, there was lots of crazy color and fabulous people, and I got my sponsor that night, was the secretary of the meeting. She had a purple mohawk and a motorcycle jacket. She had 3 years, and I thought if she could do it, anybody could do it. And so I followed her around her service. She was in the middle of service, and she said, you don't sit on the end where you fall off, you get in the center. And it was quite a miracle because I was no longer isolated and alone. I wasn't laughing, I wasn't feeling great yet. I stayed away from the guys because I knew I was a stalker. Today I call it codependency. Because I'm so sober. But I was really having a tough time with it. And there's all kinds of, my addiction went in every area of my life. It went into my relationships, it went into my sex, it went into my food, it went into shopping, it went everywhere, except I didn't use. My sponsor worked the first step with me in a brilliant way. She said, what did you use today? Not did you drink. Once the drinking and the drugs was over, what else did you use? Were you raging? Were you acting out sexually? Were you binging on money, buying things you can't afford, going into debt? All the things that I've done and undone. Takes a lot of years. And so I stayed out of relationships until I was about 3 months away from my year, and then I met him. He came outside a convention to find recovery for his drummer, a musician. Trouble. And then I went and did a 12-step call with him, and that became our first date. He drove me around Cambridge, Massachusetts, where we were, introduced me to his 15-year-old son that he raised on his own, very impressive, and then he flew me back to New York. He didn't just fly me back. He got on the plane, kissed me goodnight at the door, and went back to Boston. And so I knew I'm going to marry this guy, and we got engaged right away. And I had this big ring on my hand I couldn't wait to share in every meeting, and it was the happiest time in my life. And then people were getting sick in meetings, and the gay cancer was going around, even in the street community. And here I was engaged and wanted to get pregnant, so I thought, I'm going to just ask this doctor when it gives me the blood test for my marriage license, while you're at it, why don't you give me one of those new tests, that AIDS test? And he looked at me like I had 3 heads. He said, what do you want one of those for? I said, well, you know, I used to live in New York. And then he said, don't worry about it. Nobody tests positive here. This is Massachusetts. And I thought, excellent, I'm making a very good geographic because everyone I know is dying. So he drew my blood, and I happily had wedding arrangements. My invitations are in the mail. My dress is made. My nephew and my stepson-to-be are playing in the house. And on April 12th, 1987, my 33rd birthday, 3 months before my wedding, the doctor called, and he said, I'm so sorry. Your test results are positive. And I hit my knees, I started to pray, and I called my sponsor. Those are the 3 steps that I was taught that I did when I couldn't think because it was a good habit. And from there, my journey began. It didn't end. I thought it was the end, but I was so pissed. I got married, my husband didn't get infected. We had an interesting 5 years. I realized when one door closes, another opens. I had a 15-year-old stepson who regressed to childhood because he never had a mother, and now he had one in me. He's now 40. And I would go to meetings in the basement of Harvard University. And one day I was sharing there, and there was a professor in the room, and he invited me to speak at a faculty meeting at the beginning of the Harvard AIDS Institute. And I shared, and they offered me a job. My lemon turned into lemonade. And so I became an AIDS activist and an AIDS counselor when you used to get arrested to say this on this podium. And I watched the miracles happen that they told me I wouldn't see in my lifetime. But the greatest miracle of all began when I came into my first meeting and made a commitment, no matter what happens, I will not use. Now at 26 years, still healthy, lived to see the miracles, chose to get divorced, had another relationship with a negative man. It was hot until he wanted to get married and have children. I was 46 at the time. It didn't appeal to me. And so I moved here with my medications thinking I'm going to have a new chapter, and I do. And only a few months ago, and I'm going to wind up where I ended, and I will say, and I know I ran through this, but without a sponsor, which I called and saved my life, and going through those steps and the flashlight on my life, because I was preparing to die, so I had no secrets left. It was not a big deal all of a sudden. My 6 and 7, my character defects are a daily piece of work. That's the thing I get a reprieve from if I work on my 10th step. If I meditate, which I love to do every day for at least 20 minutes, that's my short meditation. And then I get to come here on a 12th step and sponsor and be sponsored. A few months ago, my beautiful little dog was attacked by a pit bull on Hollywood and Sunset and Vine, where I lived. The blood was all over me, and I ran to the cop on the corner, and I screamed for help. And he said, "Oh, that's not our jurisdiction. You'll have to call animal regulations." I said, wow, in New York, if you showed up with blood and a bleeding dog, they wouldn't say that. I was screaming, of course. My dog lived. The guys whose dog it was split, stuck me with a hefty bill. That's okay. My dog's leg was good. It all got taken care of. Somebody put a piece up and raised money for the dog, and I'm still paying the bill, but it was a good thing, and everything's cool. And then my dog gets evicted because he snaps at a new property manager. And I think, is God trying to tell me it is so time for you to leave? And so I started looking for apartments, and I went, this really sucks. I can't find any place I want to live. I don't want to invest anymore. And my dear, sweet mother, now 81, said, "Why don't you come stay with me, honey?" And I thought, oh my God, in Florida with you? What will I do? So I went there and I cried for 2 weeks. I spent New Year's, I'm going 57 years old, 26 years clean and sober, and I'm at the temple on New Year's with seniors. Shoot me now! And then something happened, as it always does. I looked for a meeting hall, and there it was, in the woods in Jupiter, Florida, a triangle log cabin with pictures of Bill, Dr. Bob and Mr. Bill there. Mr. Bill! Mr. Bill! Hello, I'm an alcoholic. How are you? Oh, no! And I walked into the meeting and I saw this and I started to cry and I knew I was going to be okay. And of course, today, I have new friends there. The miraculous thing is the story that I told to my mother when I started. I discovered when I got there, of course, that she was really 81. And I realized I was the tornado that ran through her life. And I got to be of service to my mother, cleaning her refrigerator, driving her around. She was never going to tell me on the phone that she needed help. And now she's a grateful member of Al-Anon with a sponsor. And she calls me to say I'm working my 4th step, and my sponsor wants me to write all the things I did bad. Was I bad? I said, Ma, you were 81. We all did some screwy things. And we have a close, lovely, gorgeous relationship today. The gift, once again, was that God brought me to Florida. And instead of the 2 months that I thought I would stay, I stayed 3. And I didn't want to leave her. And I left my little Romeo in her care because he found where he's best of service for now. He loves the senior life. Everybody's so calm, and he's so relaxed there, and he's not stressed out on those Hollywood streets, and he's on a golf cart in Jupiter, Florida. And my mother cuddles with him, and he doesn't seem to bite her. So that is part of the beauty of living sober. And my principles and steps of working, and I know I didn't write them out to you, but they are integrated into that story. That story would not have happened if I didn't recognize when I got to Florida it was my turn to be of service. And what that meant was all-encompassing. And every day I woke up and I'd look at my mother and she's healthy, and I'd say, thank you, God, for this day that we get to breathe in and out together. What a blessing. Thank you. You are all a blessing. Keep breathing in and out.